As was promised yesterday, we are going to look at chapters 10 and 11 of the book of Genesis. These are the descendants of Noah after the flood, as his sons now have children. We have in chapter 10 the children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, having children. We get some names here early on. Well, a man by the name of Nimrod shows up in verse 8. We'll come back to him in a moment. It just says of him, he's a mighty hunter before the Lord. And he starts his kingdom in Babel and other places as well. This apparently was the greatest man on earth as far as power, leadership, and so forth. But we don't get any idea that he's a great man like Noah had been spiritually. But let's move on with that. And we get some other names going through here. But what we find that in chapter 11 is that the people that are now being born and growing up, and the human race is spreading out, not geographically, they're staying together, as we find in chapter 11, verse 1. They do not scatter. Now remember, part of the mandate that God gave Noah was for them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. But they don't want to do that. They don't want to fill the earth. They apparently want to stay together. Chapter 11, verse 1, now the whole earth used the same language and the same words, and it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. So the whole human population at this point are traveling together. They're looking for apparently a good place to stay, and they found one in the land of Shinar, it says, and they settled there as a group, in contrast to what God had told them to do. So that's the first evidence we have that things aren't going so well with this new group of people, Noah's descendants. And then we start seeing some real problems in verse 4 of chapter 11. Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name, otherwise we'll be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Notice the resistance to what God wanted them to do, to scatter over the face of the earth, to fill the earth. They don't want to do that. And so they're going to resist God, and their methodology, what they came up with, was to build a tower that would reach into heaven. Now, this is not uncommon in ancient mythologies and religions to see these kinds of towers being built in which people worshiped at the top of those towers, believing that they met with their gods at such locations. Perhaps this group, obviously not knowing a great deal about God at this point or anything else really, thought that if they could reach into heaven, they could challenge God himself. If God must be in heaven, we can challenge God there. And so we'll build this tower and we'll challenge God. We'll stake our position. We'll make a name for ourselves. And we will be like God. Well, the Lord wasn't particularly pleased with this, as you probably know and can understand. And so the Lord finally said, enough is enough. Now remember, he had not all that long ago, we don't know the exact date or anything, but not all that many generations back had destroyed the whole human race, except for Noah and his family. And now here's another generation who is just doing almost the exact same thing in defiance of God. God said, I've had enough. He said in verse 7, come, let us go down and confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city, and therefore the name was called Babel. Now that's interesting to us in a number of ways. First of all, they had one language, and they gathered together. The Lord says, I will scatter them by confusing their languages. That is, he would give them multiple languages, and they would then separate according to their languages over the face of the earth and scatter them as God wanted them to do anyway. They had built this tower and this city called Babel. And remember with Nimrod was a mighty hunter. He established this town, this city. So what we have here is this Nimrod, whatever he is or whoever he is the leader of the gang. He is the leader in the opposition against God. He's a mighty hunter, and he believes in his own destiny, I guess. He's got it made, but the Lord shows him otherwise. And so that effort on the part of humanity to defy God under Nimrod fails. We go on to the rest of the chapter, and we're now introduced to a cast of characters that will play an important role throughout the rest of the Old Testament history and even beyond in many ways. And this is where God begins the process of setting aside Abram, or known later as Abraham, as the one of promise. Abraham, we find at the end of chapter 11, is living in Ur with his father and some other relatives. Acts tells us that he's an idol worshiper. He's not a worshiper of God. And yet God calls him to be the father of a nation, a father of the Jewish people, the nation ultimately of Israel. He calls him out of Ur into a land of promise that he would give him, and that's in chapter 12, which we'll not look at today. But we find that Abraham and his family are now going to a place, and God will give him a covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, which will serve to be a blessing. Verse 3 of chapter 12, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And so Abram is going to be a blessing because God is going to give him a promise, and that promise is still in effect today, and it permeates the scriptures going forward. So now we're starting over again. We started over with Noah. We started over in a sense at Babel. Now we're starting over with Abram, and things are going to change. God is going to isolate a certain group of people to be his people.